Welcome back to Plants It Where the Sun Don't Shine with Dr. Dennis. This is season 2. My apologies for those of you who've been waiting for a new set of episodes. It's been a time, let me say. But new music, new intro, new season. And so we've got a different format that we're going to follow this year. Instead of doing mostly plant profiles, this year is going to be a little bit more about stories. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself and my gardening journey, and then also plan to interview a number of folks that I know in the gardening world who I have friendships with or connections to, and to include them on the podcast. So this episode 1 of season 2, it's all about Dennis. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about memories that I have about gardening over time. So not necessarily specifically linked just to shade gardening, but just sort of my journey in the gardening world. And I guess the first memory is not even my own memory, actually. It's something that I was told about my gardening journey. It was when I was a child. We had neighbors, the Bergs, who had an amazing garden. They literally lived out of their garden. The amount of produce that they grew, it wasn't ornamental, it wasn't shrubs, anything like that. It was really a vegetable garden. And they were folks who owned a health food store in our part of the province. And Mrs. Berg shared a memory that she had one day when we were talking in the yard when I was in my 20s. She remembered me and my brother trying to grow vegetables on the little slip of land that was between our property and what we affectionately knew as the pit, which was like an empty set of lots in our neighborhood that eventually got developed. But during my childhood, it was known as the pit because really it was undeveloped. There was gravel and some trees, and it was kind of a bit of a wasteland. And we were gardening on this little tiny strip of land that was probably our property, but on the other side of a hedge that my parents had put in. And I guess we were growing some vegetables. I don't really remember it, but she thought it was so cute that we were involved in gardening at such a young age and that I was showing this interest. So that's like the first thing. But I will say that it was sort of indicative of who I was as a kid. I was always interested in nature, animals and plants. And I remember my dad bringing me home a zebra plant when I was a kid. I wasn't into sports. I was very much, nature focused. And I think my dad sort of wanted to foster a little bit more of that by supporting my efforts in plants and gardening by bringing me home the zebra plant, which I, affectionately loved to death because I overwatered it. I remember when I was a young person going to friends of ours' house, and there was like a dinner that was being had. A couple of different families came together, and I remember talking about plants at the dinner table, and someone cheekily referred to me as a flower boy, and intentionally meant it as a dig, as if it was taking a hit against my gender or sexuality, which turned out to be pretty accurate in the end anyway. I've pushed back against gender norms, I think, in my life, and I am a gay man, so it maybe was indicative of who I was. And maybe that is part of my story, is that gardening really is an extension of my values and my identity, because I believe in this thing called queer ecology. I think that's part of the story. I will say that in my early adulthood, I was involved in gardening as well. So I went over to Philippines for a couple of years, and I was involved in backyard gardening and tree planting while living in Philippines. And that was a really big thing for me in terms of really developing some skills around gardening. And I returned home, and because I didn't have my own home and I didn't have property, I was either living at my parents' or renting apartments or living elsewhere. That meant that I needed to rely on some space to be able to sort of exert this energy I had around gardening. So mom and dad allowed me to garden at their place. I had a very large plot of land at the back of their yard that they allowed me to kind of go nuts with. But inevitably, my dad, trying to help out, weeded out many plants that really weren't meant to be weeded out, but he didn't know them, so he just pulled them. Parsley is the one that sort of stands out as a memory for me. I say this sort of therapeutically. Dad has just passed away, so that's part of the reason why there's been delay in getting this podcast going this year. But I remember these things about my connection with Dad and plants because I'm in a fairly introspective mode right now. I will say sort of the next piece of my journey probably is connected to my former in-laws, the Eberhards, who were folks who also had a health food store and really did live in a connection to land and were actively reforesting the property that they had inherited and were active gardeners. And I really learned a lot from both of them, actually. I think there was a lot by way of the aesthetic that I learned from them, but then also about the connection to the natural world, not just the aesthetic part. So building that combination of both ornamental, edible, herbal, and like native plants as well. So really that was a piece of the journey, and I think it would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that, even though I'm no longer really connected to the Eberhards. I will say that when my partner and I bought our first place, when we lived in what is formerly known as Ottawa, on traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe and other nations, I really sort of was introduced to shade gardening. I think there's this like initial connection to gardening where people see all these amazing, beautiful flowers and plants that they want to grow, and they're predominantly geared towards sunny places. But it was our property in Ottawa that was actually predominantly shady, and it kind of forced me to start thinking about shade gardening, and I grew to really love it. There was a little space outside of our fence in what was, theoretically the common area of the condo, but I guerrilla gardened. I took it over and added a whole bunch of shade-loving plants. People used to stop and like take a look at it as they would walk through their the pathway behind properties on this like shared aspect of the condo, it was a space for me to really extend my interest in gardening in this, what I would now reflect on as being, pretty terrible soil and also pretty constrained space and ridiculous climate. For those of you who know Ottawa, it's a very, very limited zonal gardening space. So for me, it was challenging, but it pushed me creatively to really explore the shade gardening world. I think it was also when I was living in Ottawa that I really got introduced to garden clubs. So I became a member of a local garden club in Ottawa, and that led me to seek out garden clubs wherever we ended up moving to and living thereafter, at least in Canada. And that gives real access to cool plants that you might not otherwise be able to access through commercial sources. So for me, being a member of a garden club, yeah, sure, you get to meet other gardeners and get to talk about plants and do all the fun stuff that happens at garden clubs. But really, it's about accessing plants during annual plant sales and seed sales, which has been, an endless wealth of plant material for me in all of those places I've lived since. I think those are sort of some of the standout memories I have. I just wanted to be able to share that little bit of my history and my story because this year, as I said, The focus of Plant It Where the Sun Don't Shine will be on stories, just kind of heard over and over again over the last 6 months, in particular in conferences that I've attended and different things that I've been part of, that people really do want to hear those stories. So really want to dive in. And if you're listening to this podcast and you are a shade gardener and you have a story that you want to tell and you'd like to be interviewed or be part of a podcast or an episode for the podcast, don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to include others. As I said, I have already got a couple of people in mind, and we've informally sort of set an agenda. Really looking forward to that, and looking forward to this season together with all of you on the podcast. Thanks so much. Get out there and plant it where the sun don't shine. Thanks for listening. Thanks also goes to Sherry Donegan, Jonathan Scott, and of course Ian Jefferson for brainstorming podcast name ideas with me. Credit goes to Sherry on that one. If you have thoughts or ideas you'd like to share, please email me at plantitwherethesundon'tshine@gmail.com. That's one word without the apostrophe. You can also follow the show on Instagram at Plant It Where the Sun Don't Shine with Dr. Dennis. Hosting is provided by Spotify for podcasters. Until next time, thanks for listening. Go plant it where the sun don't shine.